I know where there's some, right here in the hall, clerk.
No, Molly, I have
All right, welcome back to the Zenith Royal 760 Navigator. And we're dealing with the missing buttons this time. You may recall last time that I made a mold for the missing button. And since then, I managed to screw it up. So I had to do it again. And I had to do it again with some new silicone, new to me. It's the Alumilite Trans 40 two-part system. And I mean, Alumilite's been in business for a long time. They make good products. This is really bubbly relative to the last one I did with a different kind of product. I don't know if that's focusing there or not. Anyway, it's very bubbly. So what we'll do, I poured this yesterday and I've introduced a lot of air bubbles. We'll see how bad it is. But we're going to break this apart and give you a look at what it looks like. Recall that this much of it is, of this form is clay. Then the knob is pushed down in there with the outside facing part down into the clay. And what we're casting now is the shaft that goes over the control on the radio and the backside of the knob. So we'll break this apart. And as I might have said before, I hope I did, is when you make one of these, you just don't worry about doing it perfectly because you're going to do this. You're going to tear it apart and throw it away. It's just a throwaway item. Okay, there are the sides off. Now you can see the clay layer and the silicone on top of that. And I'll just peel that part off. Then what you do is now this is kind of critical. When you take the clay off, you don't want to disturb the knob. And I'll explain why in a minute. There are our locator pins, which I can take out now because we don't need them anymore. Peel the clay away. Hold the knob in place. Take out this locator. Like that. And we're going to use this clay again in a minute, so I'll just leave it right there. And there's a cast of, in here is a cast of the back side of the knob. And on this side we've got our two locator pins. We've got this shelf pin and this acorn nut. Imprints right there. Now, the temptation is to pull this out and see how your mold worked. How the plastic oozed inside that hole, whether it captured the shape of the back of this knob. The problem is, if you take this out, you'll never get it back in there the way it is right now, fitting flush. It just will not work. It won't happen, and you'll have to start all over again. So the very best thing you can do is do not disturb this thing. Do pick the bits of clay and stuff off as best you can. But leave this. Leave this. I'll clean it up with a little bit of paper towel here, just to make sure we want this half to give us as good an impression as we can get. So I want this to be very clean around here. And the clay always leaves a little residue. Again, it won't stick to the next silicone pour we do. But what will stick to the next silicone pour we do is silicone. Silicone sticks to itself. Doesn't stick to much of anything else, but it loves itself. So the next thing to do is to build a box using the same material. This time the box, I'll trim this, I'll get some loose odds and ends here. I'll trim this flattish. The next box I build will hold this on the bottom like that, and we'll do the pour from this top side so we can capture this half of the mold and this half of the knob. And what we need to do when we do that, where did my release go? Is we'll need to spray the silicone here, this silicone layer, with a release agent so that the next silicone pour we do in here won't stick to this silicone. So we can separate the two halves. So I'll stop here and build a box and then show you the next pour.
By the way, you read music, Johnny?
I did once, and I can pick it up again pretty fast. Why, when I was a kid, I studied for a long, long time under the famous Professor Ware. Long Underwear McGee, I was known as.
That's pretty good, Johnny, but...
Long Underwear McGee, the mighty mucky muck of the metronome, making mugs, the mediocre musical mucks muddling through a mess of monotonous medleys, making millions marvel at the minor melodies made into magnificent masterpieces by the miraculous movements of my magic mitt, nipping many a maestro as I modulated from march militaire into minuets in G, and that's the story of Long Underwear McGee.
All right, here's our mold. Very crudely built, like everything I do. It just fits snugly around the silicone that we already made. So what will happen next is, well, first of all, I should point out, I don't know if you can see this. Let me get a light over here. Right down in here, I can't tell if it's focusing or not. Probably too close. Right down in here, in each of that corner and that corner and that corner and that corner, all four corners, the original silicone mold is rounded. So there are voids down in there. There and there and there and there. So what I'm going to do is soften up a little bit of clay and push the clay down into those corners so that when we do the next pour, it won't run down in there and bond with the existing silicone half. So I'll do that next. Okay, I've crammed a little clay in each of the corners of the mold so that the new silicone pour won't run down the side and bond to the sides of this mold. And I will spray it before I do the next pour with release agent. This is Stoner Rocket Release. Seems to work. I don't know anything about it beyond what it says on the can. But that's not yet. First we have to measure up and stir up some silicone. Now this is the cup I used before, and as you can see, whatever you did yesterday just comes off in one piece. It's nice and clear when it doesn't have any bubbles in it. It's nice silicone. It's a nice molding agent. I may wish that I had created some sort of a vacuum chamber to suck the bubbles out, but we'll see. We'll see. Okay, so we'll use the same stirrer, the same cup. This stuff, the Alumilite Trans 40 is, what is it, 10 to 1? I don't recall. Yeah, 10 to 1 by weight. So if you have 10 ounces of this, you're going to have 1 ounce of the fixer, the catalyst to go with it. So we need a scale. I've borrowed the one from the kitchen, our kitchen scale. Put it right here. Piece of plastic over the top so that nothing sticks to it I don't want to stick to it. Turn it on. I like to measure in grams personally because it's just easy to count instead of translating between ounces and so on. So I'll zero this to set it for the weight of the cup. I said, thank you. All right, and we'll pour in the silicone. And I want about, the volume here was about 70 to 100 grams as I recall for the bottom half. So it should be about the same for the top. And this stuff is really thick. It's one of the thickest silicons I've ever messed with. Not that I am an expert. Tap Plastics in Portland makes one that's a 50-50 combination, and it pours. It's so thin, and because of that, it has fewer bubbles. You end up with fewer bubbles. So yeah, I'll try to do about 70 grams, and then we can just add 7 grams of the catalyst. I don't know if you can see the scale or not. My arm's in the way, I'm sure. Okay, there's 70 grams. 70 grams of the silicone, 71, and then we'll add 7 of the catalyst. Giving us 77, 78, right in there, total. There we are, 78, okay. So that's the catalyst. This stuff gives you about 2 hours of work time, which means 2 hours, it's a long time for plenty of time to stir it and get everything ready. We won't need that much time, I hope, unless something goes horribly wrong, which is always possible. So then you stir, stir, and you try not to introduce any air bubbles, and guess what? That is impossible. It's impossible not to introduce air bubbles. I can't remember if I said before, when you stir this stuff, you don't want to use a wooden stick. I use wooden sticks for everything except this stuff, because there's some alkali or something in the wood that interferes with drying and the hardening of the rubber, of the silicone. So the best advice they have is don't use it. Don't use wood. So I always, every time we go on a picnic or something, we're gathering plastic knives and forks and spoons, and we wash them and save them, and I use them for stuff like this. Or I don't care if I have to throw the spoon away. I suppose that doesn't make me a very good naturalist or conservationist, but then I don't throw many of them away. I use them again. So you want to make sure you get the tops or the sides of the container scraped away and the bottom as best you can. And again, go slowly as you can, because the faster you go, the more air bubbles you're introducing. And I've introduced a ton of air bubbles in here. So we'll just have to live with that. Okay, it's probably stirred enough. It suggests stirring for 2 or 3 minutes. Which makes sense. You want the catalyst as well blended with the rubber as you can get it. Okay, call that good. Okay, I'll save this because that silicone will dry on there and just peel right off. Don't need to worry about it anymore. Okay, I'm going to step aside and spray the mold. And again, the release agent is to keep this silicone from sticking to this silicone, because if you don't do that, it will stick like crazy, just like glue, and you'll never get it apart, and your poor little knob will be trapped in there forever. Not really, you can cut it out, but then you've wasted all your effort. I don't know if you can see down in there, but there are a lot of air bubbles. Some of the bigger ones are rising to the top right now. But again, without a vacuum chamber to suck the air out of this mixture, I'm kind of stuck with it the way it is. So what you do when you pour silicone into a mold is you pour it into a corner in as thin a stream as you can, and you let the silicone flow out over the contents of the mold. So what I'm going to do is start the pour. I'm going to go as high as I can, because that will give me the thinnest possible stream, which will reduce the air bubbles quite a lot. Okay.
So it's just going into the corner of the mold, slowly oozing out over the whole thing. What we want is enough silicone in there to cover the top of the knob, about the same amount as covered the end of the shaft. So in this case, like a half inch would be fine. So if you get this a half inch above the knob itself, that would be great. You don't have to fill this whole volume. You can if you want, but you don't have to. And I'll speed this up.
Okay, that should do us. The rest of this is waste. If you did this commercially, you would try to reduce the amount of waste that you have, of course, by calculating the volume of the mold. Because I do so few, I don't much care if I waste a little silicone, because I don't do, this is the second mold I've made in 2 years, I think. So there it's done. It is full of air bubbles. A lot of them will, because this has a working time of around 2 hours, a lot of them will slowly make their way to the top and pop. But unless some egregiously large ones you can see are in there, and I don't, I'll just have to wait until tomorrow, see how it looks then. So that's part 2 of making a button mold and a button.